Welcome to the Super Region 2 playoff pod. I'm Coach Poe, joined by Kferg as always. And Kferg, here we are wrapping up week one of the playoffs and diving into a very exciting week two. Very excited about this week and really excited to talk about the games that we saw last Saturday and some of the matchups we're going to see this Saturday.
Well, certainly a lot to talk about, a lot to break down. Things didn't quite expect. We didn't happen as we expected. So, yeah, let's talk about it.
All right, let's dive into it. Let's not waste any more time. The first thing I want to talk to you about, Chris, is the Super Region 2 Harlon Hill nominees got announced. And on the screen, you see the Super Region 2 Harlon Hill nominees. I know you were looking at this before we hopped on the show, and there was a couple guys that really kind of piqued your interest, Chris. Give us a rundown of some guys that you're maybe not surprised to see on this list, and then maybe one or two guys if you're surprised to see anybody on this list.
Well, you kind of have to start with guys who've already been here and have gotten to like the finalist level, which is going to be none other than Sammy Edwards, quarterback at Valdosta State, and Jada Byers, the running back for Virginia Union. I mean, those guys have put up, eye-popping stats in the past. Jada Byers, number 2 in the country in rushing yards. So, I mean, that really, sort of stands out in this bunch. I would say a couple that probably are big names that certainly a different spin, because there's a lot of defense on this list. And a lot of times we know of Harlon Hill as a offensive award, over the last really like 2 or 3 decades. But Benari Black, Johnson C. Smith, linebacker, I think he has like 114 tackles on the year, and quite a few tackles for loss. Sort of the anchor for a really good defense is a big one. Marquise Fleming has definitely had a really great career, and has some name recognition. It really, I would say, stand out and kind of a dark horse. David Wright III for a big stretch of the year. He was, in the top 5 in passing in the country. Probably took a little bit. Well, he did take a little bit of a nosedive over the last 2 games, threw 5 interceptions. I believe he threw 5 in one game, and I think he threw 4 in another one. So his numbers don't look as good, but certainly was one of the big cogs in what Clark Atlanta was able to do and turning around that team and their story for this year. So, those are a few names that really stand out that, viewers should know about as folks vote on who should move to the next round of the Harlon Hill.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting you made the defensive point, Chris. There's 3 or 4 guys on this list. Benari Black, Justin Fleming, DB from Winston-Salem State, Marquise Fleming, Trayvon Lambert. Do we see a path? I mean, obviously we know it's typically an offensive award. Chris, do you see there being a path for those guys moving on to the next round and becoming finalists?
Well, you only have 2 per region, right? So, I mean, basically you would think that the front runners are Byers and Edwards, and who do you see supplanting them? I just don't see it. I mean, now Sammy Edwards, his numbers aren't as good as last year, and a lot of that has to do with the way that Valdosta is running their defense. I mean, their offense now, and they didn't have to rely on him as much. So, but he's got name recognition, and that's always a big part of the Harlon Hill. And I think some of that's just unfortunate based on the way that the voting is conducted.
Sure.
And so somebody like a Benari Black is going to have not a lot of people are going to know a lot about Johnson C. Smith enough in 1 year to get him over that hump, I'm afraid. But, certainly he really does stand out to me from a defensive perspective. If not him, then Marquise Fleming for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, again, it'll be interesting to see kind of how this thing pans out and who are the 2 finalists that move on from Super Region 2. So really exciting to pay attention to. Really thought it was important that we kind of hit on this. Congratulations to every guy that is on this list. It's an impressive honor to be on this list. I think it says a lot about not just them, but the legacy they're leaving in their programs and the programs that they play in. So congratulations to every one of these guys, and best of luck, going on to the next stage. All right, Chris, let's dive into this thing, man. So right there, Carson Newman 13, Miles 14, first ever playoff win for Miles, and it was at home. We've got some highlight film. I'm gonna cue that up, and you give us a rundown on kind of what this game looked like.
Well, the big thing about this game is a lot of the scoring for Miles, as you kind of see here. This was the first half. They between Gennaro Scott scoring, and then also Cameron Ivory throwing a pass, a touchdown pass. Those are big deals. Now, the second half, a lot of this for Miles turned into the defense. When you only score 14 points and you expect to win, that means you've got to have a defense that is a constant bend but don't break, and that's kind of what happened in this particular game. That interception you saw by Miles salted the game away, but it was like a minute left in the game, and so it was one of those games where you basically you're sitting down and you're watching it the entire time, because you just don't know what's going to happen. You don't know if somebody's going to just break and make a big mistake, and that big mistake comes back to haunt them. It was just one of those things that you had to basically, if you're Miles, you're on this ride and you got to hold on for dear life. So that's what that game really was.
Yeah, and you talk about just holding on and hoping, and I felt like it was both ways there at the end of that thing, right, Chris? Like Carson Newman forces a turnover. Was that like a minute left in the ball game? They forced a turnover, they get the ball back, and then they throw the interception. And I think you made a good point. I think it was just that team that was, who's going to make the last mistake, or who's going to have the ball last, so to speak, to win it. So, yeah.
And I think that's probably a good time to go to Sam Shade, talk a little bit about his thoughts about the game, and especially the ending.
Well, the last 2 minutes of that ball game was, man, it was up and down. We get a stop on fourth down, and we're going to run some time. We knew they were going to call timeouts, and we were going to punt the football. And we felt like if we punted the ball, they weren't going to be able to, move the ball down the field on our defense. But unfortunately, we get a fumble, uncharacteristic by Gennaro Scott. But the defense rose up once again. Coach Chris Shellen, our defense coordinator, Coach Langham, Coach McKinnon, Coach Phillips, those guys do a great job with that defense, especially preparing for option in 1 week. I mean, it was a fantastic job by that group of coaches, just getting ready for an option team in 1 week. That was really special.
So what he's basically describing was, in the last 2 minutes of the game, Miles has the ball, and Carson Newman has all three of their timeouts. So they burn their timeouts, and they get and Miles is about at midfield, and they fumble the ball, and Carson Newman recovers it. And you're like, you got to be kidding me, right? Because here you are, this is the team that's never won in the playoffs. You're probably pins and needles. You don't want to make a mistake. And then, bam, disaster strikes.
Yeah.
So now you got Carson Newman, who, they got to get down to, half of the field in about a minute to at least get into, field goal range. And what really stood out about that was how many times Carson Newman passed in this game. Like, they're an option-based offense, and they threw the ball 20 times. And one of those 20 attempts, lo and behold, was the interception.
Yeah.
So you just kind of like wonder, like, Miles' defense was that good to force Carson Newman into some very uncomfortable positions. And forcing them to pass is not something that they really excel in. So kudos to Miles for that. We thought that they would have the defense to sort of pin their ears back if they got ahead, and that's exactly how the story played out.
Yeah, and I think Coach made a really good point right there, Chris. He talked about being able to defend the option in a week. Until you've actually done that as a coach, like it is extremely hard to teach option rules, to teach option discipline in 2 to 3 days of practice. Like you could do it, but then once you get on the game field, it's a whole nother level. It's a whole nother speed. So I think it's a great job by that Miles defense to do that. What was interesting to me, and we were texting back and forth a little bit during this game, Chris, was at the end of it there, when Carson Newman forces the turnover, they get the ball about midfield, you know that they're out of timeouts and they've got to go probably 25, 30 yards to get into some sort of field goal range to have a chance. And so at that point, you know they're going to have to throw the football. You just wondered how effective and how efficient they were going to be at that, given that's not really their bread and butter. That's not what they try to do. And if you're Miles, you knew that they couldn't run the football. They didn't have enough time on the clock to operate efficiently at what they wanted to do. So I think it was a great job by Miles to kind of force them into doing something they didn't want to do. Anytime you're an option team, I think, and you throw the football 20 times, the defense is doing a great job taking things away. And I think they did that. We talked about that last week, just kind of like, hey, what does that path look like? You kind of said it. It was going to be that shrink the game on both sides of the ball, making the most out of those possessions and the defensive stops. And man, I felt like this, like a couple other games we're going to talk about here, we were kind of like, if they're going to win, or this is how it's going to happen. I felt like it kind of played out the way we thought it might against two pretty good teams. I would ask you this, Chris, how big of a win is this for that Miles program? I mean, this is their first playoff win.
It's huge.
Yeah.
It's huge. I mean, I thought about this from a CIAA perspective, and like how many CIAA schools have actually won a playoff game, not just make the playoffs, but actually won a playoff game. When you look at that from the SIAC lens, there ain't a whole lot of teams. It's Albany State and Tuskegee, if I'm thinking correctly.
Okay. Sounds about right. Yeah.
Yeah. So for Miles to be in that company, like that's great company to be in. They also contributed. We'll talk about Virginia Union later, but it's never happened where you have two HBCUs win a playoff game in the same year.
Yeah.
Like that's how incredible this is in general. But for Miles, it's a huge statement win. Like think about the SIAC for a second. Like the SIAC had such a bad, not even like slightly okay. It was a bad out of conference year.
Okay.
And so when you have Miles, it was easy to write them off as like the one team. Like they came for the SIC, they don't know how to play out of conference. And to win a game like this against a very good Carson Newman team, like a big deal too. So yeah.
And I also think it speaks to the importance of what Miles did throughout the regular season, getting to 10-2, but also having the opportunity to host a home playoff game. I think was really, really important to them. I think having that at home in the friendly confines of your home field and everything in that nature is really important, as opposed to going on the road in a potentially hostile environment. So I'm with you, Chris. I think this is a huge win for Miles. And I'd love to see him keep building on it. We'll talk about who they're playing this week here in a minute, but I hope they can build on this and continue to grow.
Yeah, really quickly, I just want to point something out here.
Yeah.
You have in here the defense for Carson Newman held Miles to 153 yards of offense. Well, when we talk about shortening the game, Miles's two drives to score, they were less than 70 yards apiece. Like they didn't have to drive the length of the field. I think their longest one was like 60 yards. So they did put themselves in position to, not have to work as hard and make the best of it and pin their ears back. So, by comparison, Carson Newman had nearly twice the offense. They had 305 yards of offense.
Wow. Yeah. Wow.
So,
that's impressive. Yeah. Maximizing opportunity, right? Like, and I'm sure if you're in that Carson Newman side of it, you're saying, we outgained them. We just didn't finish drives. We didn't punch the ball in. We turned the ball over, or our drive stalled out. So, yeah, I think it's all again, great job by Miles, maximizing opportunities and executing when they needed to.
But let's say this about Carson Newman, though. Like, this is an incredible season for an Eagles club that was down for a couple of years, right? Returning back to the option and to have done as well as they have done in the first year since returning back to the option. Incredible performance on their part.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And I think, I don't remember who I was talking to, but they've had some injuries offensively, and I think that has I don't know. I don't want to choose the right words here. I think I don't want to say it hampered their growth, but I think it it didn't help them hit their best stride at this point in the year. So, and you don't want to hide behind that. That's part of the game. That's part of what you have to deal with. But again, timing is everything. So, but I couldn't agree more. I think that Carson Newman club to come back the way they did, what's scary for the rest of the South Atlantic Conference, I think in Super Region 2 is that if they can get back to where they were, that it's going to be a long couple years for a lot of other teams if Carson Newman can get back to how they used to be. And I think they're in a good path to do that right now. So, All right, Chris, let's dive into the next game here. We've got Lenoir-Rhyne on the road at West Alabama. 37-34 victory for the Bears in a game that I don't know that we necessarily saw going this way. I think we talked about last week. We thought West Alabama, at least I did. Hey, West Alabama was going to make a run. I think that we didn't talk about them very much. And I felt like Lenoir-Rhyne played about as good as they could have in this football game. And we're going to dive right into some highlights here, Chris, and kind of take a look at it. So as you can see here, it started out West Alabama. They scored first and got it going. But they score first, and you see the play right here. But they can never really put it away. Lenoir-Rhyne had answers every time West Alabama scored. You see right here the underneath crossing routes. Lenoir-Rhyne was able to get loose. Jalen Ferguson able to hit his receivers underneath, and they were able to run for big gains right here. You see Arsenault here breaking out of the pocket for the Tigers. And again, every time I felt like West Alabama made a play like this, Jalen Ferguson and the Bears had an answer. They came right back. At one point, West Alabama had a 10-point lead in the third quarter. They worked up that lead, just not able to put it away. The defense wasn't able to get a stop when they needed to. But again, Lenoir-Rhyne just hung around, kept the game, able to get the game tied in the fourth quarter and then kick that field goal to win it. And you see that right here. Here's the game winner if you're Lenoir-Rhyne. They get the ball back, does West Alabama. They drive down there and high snap, what you see right here, high snap, little timing was off. And he just pushes the ball. That kick would have sent it to overtime with time expiring. So a big win for the Bears on the road. And thanks to Lenoir-Rhyne and the athletic department for the highlights. But, again, great job by Lenoir-Rhyne. They were able to hang around, score, and they just couldn't. West Alabama just felt like you couldn't put it away. Just couldn't put it away. And Jalen Ferguson made play after play after play, threw for 411 yards and 3 touchdowns, and it was only 22 of 40. So that talks about the number of opportunities he had to throw the ball. And then defensively, I felt like West Alabama just didn't get the turnovers and the stops that we've been accustomed to seeing this year, Chris. And we hear from Coach Socha and talks about this win here. So we'll dive into Coach, and we'll be back here in a second.
Exciting game. A lot of things happened. A lot of momentum swings and deficit. We're down by 10 going into the fourth quarter and be able to pull that thing off and win. And it was a complete team win. So super proud of our guys. I think it's, we're starting to feel ourselves here a little bit. We talked about playing our best, finishing up October, get in November, and then you have a chance to maybe get to December. You got to play your best. And we had some guys step up like Damian today playing his best when we needed it. So super proud of our team. Not the cleanest win. Some things happened, but that's why you play 60 minutes, and our guys did a great job. Super proud of them. Yeah, well, we knew they were really good. Obviously, running the football. We didn't run the ball very well effectively today. So we knew we had to put some things together and put some things on the call sheet and get them called. And we got a lot of things called, and our players made some plays. Our quarterback did a really good job. Our offensive line did a good job protection. And then obviously with some explosive plays, and we got a lot of chunk plays. And you have a receiver go over 200 yards and a quarterback over 400 yards. It's a pretty special day. So I'm super proud of those guys. Certainly, we left some things on the field, but in the passing game, but they did a great job.
So, Chris, I think Coach made a really good point there. I think they knew they had to play their best football in this game. And I felt like for the most part they did. I felt like they were able to execute at a high level. Like Coach said, they struggled running the football a little bit. But the receiver stepped up. Jalen Ferguson stepped up and made plays. And I think that just goes to credit to them of playing their best football at this time of year.
Yeah, and I think one of the things for me that stand out in this game is Lenoir-Rhyne's defense did enough to force the Tigers to stall out. Like West Alabama had opportunities to sort of drive the field. They would get to about midfield, maybe slightly over midfield, and they just stalled. I mean, like a freaking hurricane. It just stalled and it just sat there. And it's like, what are you doing? And it was, you kind of see this big fat zero in the fourth quarter because that's exactly what was happening. And then, in the last two drives, right? The last three drives, two drives for West Alabama, they threw an interception.
Yeah.
And that's just, again, that's credit to Lenoir-Rhyne's defense because at some point it was like something sort of clicked, and all of a sudden West Al just turned into the third and fourth. The second half was the West Al that we kind of knew could happen, which is very low scoring, can't get anything together. That's what we got. It was a very Jekyll and Hyde performance by West Alabama.
Yeah, and I felt like when they got up 10 points, I was like, okay, I'm watching the game. Okay, they're up 10. They've played pretty well here in the first half. Hey, we got a chance. I think if they're going to play consistently throughout, maybe they'll give up a score, but how you kind of forecast that game to go. And then don't look now, it's tied going into the fourth. And you're like, wait a minute now. But now you got to respond a little bit if you're West Alabama. They've punched back. Now, how do you respond? And for me, the fourth quarter, for it to be a field goal between two teams was in this game was crazy because I thought for sure it'd be a 14, 17 points apiece just the way they were going. But like you said, Chris, it was almost like West Alabama stalled out. Spencer Arsenault, 22 for 36 for 250 and 2 touchdowns, added about 80 yards on the ground with a rushing touchdown. But it was that interception. It almost seemed like he was trying to force the ball there in the fourth quarter. Like he was pressing to get the ball down the field and make the big plays.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, if you're West Alabama, I mean, there's a lot of sting in this loss because, as you mentioned, they were right there, 10-point lead, 34-24. Then I was like, okay, Lenoir-Rhyne just got a field goal. Now it's a 7-point game. You would think that, West Alabama was going to respond. That's what great teams do. They respond and keep you at bay. Yeah. And, no, that didn't happen. So,
yeah. No, I'm with you. And so I think it speaks to what Lenoir-Rhyne has done. They played their best football, in my opinion, on Saturday. Lenoir-Rhyne did. I think they played absolutely fantastic out of their minds. Played about as good as you could have against a tough team in a tough environment on the road. So I think it really speaks to them and their growth this year and where they started. Because don't forget now, new coaching staff. Yep. A lot of guys leave in the portal.
Yep.
You guys come in. Mm-hmm. We don't know much about them, but they answer the bell. They continue to work. They go to work every day, and they just get better, and better. And they get in the playoffs kind of quietly, like they're in the playoffs pretty quietly. Like they get in, they go on the road, they play a tough ranked, a tough West Alabama team. Because all along we kind of said, hey, wait, they got to prove something to us, and They did on Saturday, in my opinion. They proved that, hey, don't count us out. We're here to play.
Yeah, and it's easy to forget Lenoir-Rhyne's coach. I mean, he's a championship winning coach.
Yeah.
You know,
yeah.
He basically has adjusted his game plans. You know, they wanted to be a little bit more balanced. West Alabama took that away. You know, like other teams are sort of keyed in on the run, and they put the ball into the quarterback's hands and say, hey, you're going to have to go out there and win it for us. 40 pass attempts.
Yeah.
Hey, that was a career day for him.
It was. And, made the most of it. And he makes it happen with his feet as well. He's able to extend plays, come out of the pocket and deliver the ball. So yeah. All right, Chris, let's look at the third and final game of the weekend out of Super Region 2, Virginia Union at Wingate. Virginia Union escapes Matthews with Wingate, I should say, 34-31 victory in overtime. We got a lot to unpack with this one. We're going to dive into the highlights, Chris, but we have a lot to unpack with this one, buddy.
Well, in this one, you kind of see Brooks Bentley taking a shot down the field, and that was, one of the ways in which Wingate was very productive was throwing the ball down the field early, and here you kind of see them getting a safety in the fourth quarter, and then you've got a little action. That's not Mark Wright out there. That's actually R.J. Rosales, who much more mobile quarterback, converting. I believe that was fourth down to extend the drive. And then you see that big pass to Jeremiah Francis to basically help tie the game up. And then here you go. You got this situation where RJ is using his legs again to get basically right there at the goal line. And then, a little bit of the quarterback sneak. Sometimes know that is tush push these days. For VU to finish off Wingate in the overtime period.
Yeah, and Chris, I think this game was really exciting. I know if I was trying to watch most of it, is a loose term, and I definitely had some struggles with some games to watch. But as you watch this game, I do want to say, like, I felt like the backup quarterback comes in for Virginia Union in the second half. And it just took over the game. It felt like, Chris, like it was like, man, just extended plays, picked it up on the ground, almost kind of gave that Wingate defense a look that maybe they didn't see, maybe they weren't expecting, but they were able to come out and execute.
Well, R.J. Rosales came into this game after Mark Wright threw that interception, like basically with goal to go. And may have been hit with the injury bug a little bit, and R.J. Rosales is no stranger to big games. He actually was the starting quarterback against Kentucky State to start the season, and then went into Hampton, and Virginia Union was winning that game against Hampton, and then R.J. got hurt and got taken out the game, and Mark Wright comes in. He's not as dynamic as RJ is.
Yeah.
More of a pocket passer mentality, and I think a little bit of that kind of did the Panthers in against a Hampton team that they were up to the challenge against, FCS school, and really should have won that game, quite honestly. So, Mark Wright took the game. He took it over. He's been the starting quarterback, but RJ has been very engaged in games. You would think that, quarterback, they lose their starting, their position on the field, and you kind of, wonder where their head's at and can they respond when they get into the game when needed. And RJ's been very engaged in games and stuff like that, very encouraging. And I kind of saw a little bit of that at the CIAA championship game. And when Mark Wright, made a mistake, RJ was sort of there to encourage him. And so, I think it's pretty big when, they decided to switch to RJ and you kind of saw that fourth down when he converted it with his legs. Like if you don't convert that, the game's probably over.
Yep, absolutely.
And that's a very gutsy call on his part, but the dude is sneaky fast.
Yeah. Well, and I want to back up what you just said, Chris. Like you talked about his grit and then staying engaged. Like, it says a lot about the kid's character and his grit to stay involved because they take that sack in the fourth quarter and get a safety. And and at that point, it very easily could have went the other way. I felt like you're almost like, okay, here's where kind of the wheels fall off.
Right.
Well, he leads you down there and you score the touchdown in the fourth quarter. Then he takes it in overtime, almost identical, extends a play on 3rd and 4th down, gets it down the goal line, and then they get it in and they win. So I think it says a lot about that kid's character and his grit to stay the course. Hey, maybe you do lose your starting job earlier in the year, but you stayed the course and everything paid off in a playoff game when it mattered the most.
Yeah, most definitely.
And we hear from Coach here in a second, but go ahead, Chris. Did you want to finish on that or?
No, I agree 100% with you. 100%.
Yeah. Well, and we hear Coach talks about this game here, and we're gonna listen to what Coach had to say after a really, really big win for Virginia Union. So let's dive into it, Chris. We'll be right back.
It means everything. I think we've been close, some years past, but never been able to kind of kick in that door. And I knew this team was special, and I knew they had the capabilities of doing it. And I said that at the beginning of the season, and I think some people kind of laughed at it and didn't think we had what it take to be made of, to get to this point. So I'm extremely proud of this group, and I think that words can't really explain it. Just to make history. So I'm happy for the guys, and we're really gonna relish in this for a little while, but get ready for the next round.
Coach team kind of handed it to you a couple of years ago.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was at your place, right?
Absolutely. Yeah,
how much did you focus on that? Did you talk to the guys about that? Did you say this is not going to be this way this time?
I mean, these two guys were on that team, and I think in the playoffs, when you lose, it's not necessarily a loss; it's a lesson. Because when you get to that point in the season, everybody's good, and those losses inspired us to have a lot of things that we had in the playoffs the last 2 years. It inspired us to have a great offseason. It inspired guys to come back for senior years like this and have a not lose mentality. These two guys were sophomores on that team, and we went to the playoffs. And we were a young team then, and we knew if we had the chance to ever get back to this point, we were going to be good. We were going to be okay. So, I'm happy that these guys got to do that, and we get to put ourselves in the history books.
Man, Chris, first of all, the reporter asking the questions there in the second part of that video talking about 2 years ago. Why you guys pour some salt in the wound on that one? But I
don't have a problem with the question because the way things kind of work in the CIAA is a bit of a cycle.
Okay.
And I think it's really important to understand what this win means to the conference as a whole. So, there have been really two schools that have been sort of like the boogeyman for the CIAA. For a while, it was Valdosta State. And really, they're kind of like that between both the SIAC and the CIAA, given that Valdosta is near Albany and Fort Valley and Savannah.
Okay.
For the North Carolina schools and above and north, it's Wingate. Wingate has won. The last time a CIAA school beat Wingate was it's been about 15 years. And so, but that also speaks to how good, how consistent Wingate is, right? And they've only elevated their game over time. So Wingate's sort of been like that boogeyman. And so to me, that's where the context of the question is, because you go to Wingate goes to Richmond and man, it was ugly. It was bad. And that was a game where Virginia Union was probably more favored. And here they're an underdog, they're a big dog, and they walk out the big dog. So I mean, I think that's more what I think it's important to understand context.
Yeah.
And to me, I think that's where the reporter was going with that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't have a problem with it, but I was like, wow, man, that's bold question right there. I like it. But I think, and you make a really good point right there, Chris. You know, a long time you talk about Valdosta and you talk about Wingate, and they've been the boogeyman. And I think Wingate establishes for lack of a better term, the standard. There's a standard for Wingate to play at. And you felt like they just couldn't get over the hump. But you look at this win on Saturday, and it was kind of, hey, that's the standard, and now we're above the standard. We're playing better than the standard. We played a complete game of football if you're Virginia Union.
Oh, most definitely. I mean, and the numbers don't seem that much different from what they've been able to do in the past, at least this season. But still, like just against the level of competition and still be able to reduce like that is a big deal. And not doing it with the run game. That's been the one issue for VUU in games like this, is that they can sometimes be very run heavy, and it's easy to forget when they have passing games. It could be easy to forget that they still have that. And we think about the running backs that VUU have had over the last 7-8 years, you know, Tobias Taylor and then now Jada Byers. Like, they've had great rushing attacks for a number of years, but when they've had that ability to pass the ball, like they're a very dangerous team.
Yeah, and we talked about that, and we were texting a little bit on Saturday, and we were talking about, hey, the effectiveness of the Virginia Union offense, and I was watching live stats for a good part of the first half and into the second half, and it was like run, pass, complete. Like you could kind of tell that they were mixing the ball around a little bit, keeping kind of Wingate off balance, keeping them on their heels a little bit. And I think that goes to that maturation of Virginia Union, and it's the players, right? They're back for that senior year. Hey, they understand we're not going to be able to just run it into the teeth of that defense. We're going to have to throw the football. We're going to have to execute at a high level. You can't, we can throw the football, but we've got to complete those passes, right? We got to get run after catch and all the things that it matters. And they were able to do that. And so I felt like coming out of this game, it was, the momentum went back and forth, but at the end of it, Virginia Union had the momentum and they knew what they were doing, it felt like.
Yeah. I mean, most definitely. Yeah. Here's a fun stat for you.
Lay it on me.
VUU had 404 yards of offense, the most this year given up by Wingate's defense.
Wow.
The next closest, 338 yards by Limestone.
Wow. Okay.
Like, that's how high of a bar you have to meet to beat a Wingate team like this. Like, they weren't a number 2 seed for any old reason. This was a really good team.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, Chris. And that's a good, and I want to say this. I think Wingate is a very good team. And, coaching staff, they had some, Coach Reich moves into the AD role. New head coach comes in, obviously, for the most part, coaching staff sticks around, but the staff stayed together, the team stayed together, they bought in, they continued. And it's, you don't see it every day. You don't see that a lot where the team doesn't change very much. Some guys leave in the portal, some guys come in, but the staff stayed the same. The consistency stayed the same. And it was almost like they didn't miss a beat, right? Like Wingate was Wingate, their standard was the standard, and that's just how they played all year. And so, great job by Wingate, great season. And just continuing on that Bulldog tradition. But Chris, I want to ask you this, and we talked about it a little bit. This is a big win in the CIAA. It's a big win for Virginia Union. How big of a win is it for this program? I mean, to not just win, but have the most yardage and play what I think is a pretty complete game. How important is this win for Virginia Union? What does it mean for them in the CIAA?
It's a huge win. more so for the program because the program had not won a playoff game until Saturday. They'd been to the playoffs 3 straight years. To finally get over that hump that's a huge deal. In terms of the conference as a whole, the conference, and I made a point on X on Twitter about the South Atlantic versus getting 3 teams in, and they're all great teams. They're very deserving teams in a lot of ways. But I think this shows how good the CIAA was this year. And this is the reason why we felt slighted in particular, is because, we felt like, as the CIAA, we felt like we had teams that could compete at this level. Yeah. And even if they didn't win, right, the fact that they went to overtime is a moral victory. It's not necessarily what you want, but
right. Yeah.
But these teams can play with some of these other conferences and Super Region 2, and they got the ability to do that. I wish Johnson C. Smith was full strength, because a full strength JCSU would have been awesome to watch in the playoffs. Yeah. I think they were injured or something was happening towards the end of the season, but a full strength JCSU was like a sight to watch. And the fact that VUU, yes, they're the conference champions. They got beat by somebody in the conference who's also really good, and they're able to come out and win in a game like this. It speaks volumes about where they are, where the CIAA is, what the top of the conference looks like, and how good it actually is. So VUU since 2010, you've had Winston-Salem State, who had their playoff runs. You have Virginia State to win a playoff game. I think that was like 2014. You have Bowie State win 2 games in 1 year to get to the regional final. Now you got VUU who's won. And that's elite company when you talk about the conference. Yeah. And it shows, if you allow a team to sort of get built over time, they can put together a team and can do some things in playoffs. And that's the nice thing about what the CIAA is now. It's not always a one and done type of a league. They're going to have opportunities. We're on a cycle right now. I think we're like maybe 4 or 5 years, every 4 to 5 years, they're going to get at least one playoff win, it feels like. Yeah. And so it's huge to see that, the CIAA can continue to have schools and coaches that can build programs beyond just the ones that we already known in the past to get to this level.
Right. For sure. And it kind of laminates this win for Virginia Union and the company that they are now in. So, All right, Chris. Well, we've talked about all 3 games that we saw this past weekend. Now let's kind of take a look at what that leads into this week, right? And so the number 1 seed Valdosta back in action this week. They host Miles at the 4. And then we had 2 unseeded teams, Lenoir-Rhyne, Virginia Union. Committee met, and whatever that process looks like, not quite sure, but Lenoir-Rhyne will host Virginia Union this weekend at 1:00 between the bricks in Hickory. So we have our second round matchups, and let's just dive into it, Chris. First matchup here we have this weekend is Virginia Union at Lenoir-Rhyne. Okay. And we see the schedules there, or the records rather. I'm sorry. 10-2 for Lenoir-Rhyne, 9-3 for Virginia Union. Offensively, Lenoir-Rhyne averages about 27 points per game compared to that just about 42 for Virginia Union. Defensively, they give up 18. They're almost identical, 18 points for Lenoir-Rhyne, 16.7 for Virginia Union. So very comparable on defense. Offensively, maybe that check goes to Virginia Union a little bit right there. Throw the records out the window at this point. Chris, give me your just overall thoughts, and then we're going to dive into kind of that path forward for both these teams. Give me your overall thoughts on this matchup.
Well, I mean, you talk about feeling like March Madness and the brackets have been busted. I mean, that's kind of what you got in a game like this. Um, yeah, who hosts that whole thing? It is what it is. Lenoir-Rhyne is a great place to play a football game in general, so that's kind of nice.
Yeah.
Um, it's a newer venue, right?
Yeah.
And that's no disrespect to Virginia Union. It's just is what it is.
Yeah.
But yeah, this is going to be really interesting. Wingate showed some things early on with the passing game, and it took VU a little bit of time to adjust to that. And that's definitely going to be a bit of a challenge if you allow Jalen Ferguson to sit back and pick you apart, or keep things going with his legs. So really going to be interesting from the VU perspective. And then Lenoir-Rhyne, can they continue their hot streak on offense? Is really the question there.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm with you on that. I think when I look at this matchup, I want to see consistency, right? If we look at it and you look at Lenoir-Rhyne, think about 2 weeks ago, right? They played an Anderson team and it was tight and they didn't click offensively like we saw this past week. I think it was only a 3-point game and it was a field goal they kicked as time was expiring or darn near close to it to win that game. So, we talk about the offensive explosion and playing really kind of at the top of their ability on Saturday. But a week before that, it took a last-second field goal to win against an average Anderson team this year, which I'm not taking away from Anderson, right? They're a first-year program, so I'm not taking anything away from them. But I want to see that consistency from Lenoir-Rhyne. And I flipped that to say I want to see consistency out of Virginia Union. I want to see them be able to run the football, complement that in the pass game successfully, not just throw it, but be able to execute it, and then also come up with some big stops on defense. So I think for me, this is a game of consistency. Who is more consistent on both sides of the football, but particularly offensively? I want the team that I think is more consistent has a really good chance.
Yeah.
So
I agree.
Go ahead. I'm sorry, Chris.
I agree. No, go ahead. I agree.
Yeah. Well, and I think so. My question and kind of how we've kind of dove into this is, for Lenoir-Rhyne, right? We talk about that consistency and kind of what does that look like? What is their path for victory on Saturday? If Lenoir-Rhyne's going to win, what do they have to do to win this football game?
Well, Lenoir-Rhyne has shown us that they don't necessarily have to run the ball very well in order to win games.
Yeah.
If they're able to establish something with the run, I think that does increase their chances of winning. But I think they're going to have to do two things. They're going to have to go back to, can they get big plays in the pass game? Number one. And you try to do what everybody else tries to do is to basically slow down and stop Jada Byers and force VU to pass. And that goes back to your thoughts on consistency. Now, one question mark going into this game is going to be who does VU start at quarterback? And so I think if you're Lenoir-Rhyne, you need to plan for both of those quarterbacks because they have pretty different styles. But for Lenoir-Rhyne, if you can put more of the offensive production for VU into VU's passing game, then you've got a good shot of taking down the Panthers.
Yeah, I'm with you on that, Chris. I think for Lenoir-Rhyne, they've got to be able to win this football game. They have to establish some sort of run game. You can't be one-dimensional, particularly the later you go into the playoffs, right? Like last week, the pass game was hot, the underneath, right? Like it was connecting and it was working. You have to establish some kind of run game. You can't rely on Jalen Ferguson to run the football every play or be your sole source of run game. And so I think you have to be able to run the football effectively. And then you can't turn the football over. We see from Jalen Ferguson, him extending plays, him throwing on the run. Last week, they didn't really turn the football over. And I think you have to do that again this week. You cannot give the Virginia Union offense more touches because they have the ability to hurt you. I think defensively for Lenoir-Rhyne, you have to contain Jada Byers, and you almost have to roll the dice again and say, hey, that Virginia Union passing offense has to beat us. Like, we have to contain the quarterbacks. You have to have that two different plans, but you got to stop Jada Byers. You can't let him have a field day running all over the field on you. I think if you could do that, if you're Lenoir-Rhyne, you have a really good path to win that game.
Yeah.
And for me, I think, Chris, on the other side of that Virginia Union, right? I think you have to continue to be balanced offensively and execute. You have to be able to complete the passes, get that box light to open up running lanes for Jada Byers, and then, make them basically wrong defensively, whether they're taking away the pass, taking away the run. I think whatever that situation at quarterback is, I think they have a really good problem right now going into the playoffs with two quarterbacks that could play at a high level. So I think if you're Virginia Union, you have to be able to execute that. You have to find a way to keep Jalen Ferguson in the pocket. You can't allow him to extend plays with his feet, come out of the pocket, throw the ball downfield with receivers and scramble drill, things like that. You have to keep Jalen Ferguson in the pocket and make him throw the ball into really undesirable situations. If you do that, I think it'll be mistakes. There'll be opportunities for interceptions. And I think it really makes Jalen Ferguson uncomfortable to stay in that pocket, have to step up and do that type of deal. So I think for Virginia Union, staying balanced and then figuring out a way to slow down Jalen Ferguson and keep him in the pocket is really what you have to do, make them one-dimensional.
I'll give you one even better. VUU has to force Lenoir-Rhyne into field goals if they get into the red zone. And we saw West Alabama doing that in spurts.
Yeah.
When you have teams that are very pass heavy, don't have a run game, they tend to struggle in the red zone. And that's an area that to me, VUU tends to do fairly well on defense, even if they do give up big pass plays, that when they get into the opponent gets into the red zone, they sort of lock down and they're able to force teams to settle for field goals. And so I think for Lenoir-Rhyne, that's a bit of an Achilles heel. And if you're VUU, you at least at a minimum try to keep things in front of you if you have to take your chances in the red zone, because that just seems to be an area where they sort of excel at.
Yeah, I agree, Chris.
And the other part for VUU is that Lenoir-Rhyne has been a little susceptible to good rushing attacks. Even West Al had some success running the ball. They didn't have a 100-yard rusher, but they had two folks who did rush for, I think, over 70 yards apiece. So if you're VUU, you've got more than just Jada Byers. You've got Curtis Allen. They have two different styles of running. We've seen instances where maybe Jada isn't able to get things going, but they put Curtis Allen in, and all of a sudden, it's like, well, where were these running lanes at? And a lot of that has to do with they just have two different styles of running, and then Curtis Allen is a much bigger back. So I think that I think Lenoir-Rhyne could probably expect VUU to test that run defense early just to see what they got. But I tell you one thing: if either of those running backs get loose early, it could turn into a bit of a field day, and that's not what you want if you're Lenoir-Rhyne.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think if you're Virginia Union, you have to get out quick. You can't go slow. You can't get off to a slow start. You've got to establish the run game early and get out to a quick start. I think that's a really good point. Yeah. All right, Chris. The next game, the other game in Super Region 2 this weekend, number 1 Valdosta State, number 4 Miles. At home, Valdosta State, they're 10-0 this year, Chris, compared to Miles at 10-2. Offensively, Valdosta State averages 43 points per game compared to, let's say, the 30 that Miles is averaging. The Blazer defense, and this isn't something we've probably said too much in recent years, only gives up 9 points per game as opposed to the 16, let's say 17 points that Miles has given up. And so a very intriguing matchup here in Super Region 2, Chris. And And as you look at this, what is your kind of thoughts as I think we both kind of sit here and stare at this graphic and you're like, whew, this is intriguing, but exciting. So what is your overall thoughts here on this one? I love it. Silence is deafening. Silence is deafening.
Listen, 153 yards of offense ain't gonna cut it. If you're Miles, 153 yards of offense will not cut it against Valdosta State. They will pass the ball more than 20 times.
Yeah.
What are you going to have for that? You're going to need more than 14 points to win this game. Valdosta has way too many weapons that you're going to be forced to keep up. And if you're Miles, the fact of the matter is you got to get to that. You got to get to that average, that 30 points a game average to win this game.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's a pretty big ask from Miles. We saw them not just against Carson Newman, but we've also seen them against West Alabama. Those are very low scoring games. And this is just not that kind of – Valdosta is not that kind of team that's going to get into a low scoring slugfest. A low scoring affair for Valdosta is like the 20s.
Yes, true.
So Miles, you must get to the 20s to win this game, minimum. And I'm not even talking low 20s. You want to get to the high 20s for safety, but I think that's just a lot to ask of Miles in a game like this. I just do.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that at all. I think I think this game is going to be a slugfest, particularly early, and I think it's Miles. You have to find a way to score that 30 points. You've got to get there. You can't wait until the fourth quarter. You've got to start quick. And for Valdosta State, defensively, that's not something we typically say with Valdosta State, right? Like the defense is playing well. And I know a couple guys on their coaching staff, and Darren Garrigan is their DB's coach, phenomenal coach. So when you sit here and say, hey, and it's not him, it's that whole defensive staff. But I know Darren. I've worked camps with Darren. I've known him for a while, and phenomenal coach. And so I'm not surprised when Coach Jackson brings guys like that into the staff. Like they're going to get better. And so my point in saying that is when you look at the defense for Valdosta State, they're punishing this year. They're slowing down opponents. They're putting, and then you got to figure out a way to score 43 points to match what they're averaging. And you think about who Valdosta has played: West Florida, Delta State, West Alabama. I mean, they've played pretty good opponents down there, and they're still averaging 43 points per game. They're a well-oiled machine. They're complementary both sides of the football. And so to me, Valdosta, you just got to go be you. You just got to go out there and play your game and do what you do. And you're going to be a hard out for a lot of people. For Miles, Ferg, I think you got to find a way to slow him down offensively, and you got to hope for some turnovers. You've got to steal some possessions from Valdosta, whether that's on special teams, whether that's on defense. They turn the ball over, whatever that may be. You got to steal possessions.
I agree. I mean, look at what Valdosta's defense has done. 3 shutouts and another 2 games of keeping teams in single digits in points.
Yeah.
I mean, if this was a movie, you'd be rating this rated R.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think again, if you're Valdosta, you just go be you. It doesn't, like you just said, you just go do what you do. And it doesn't matter who lines up across from you. You just execute. I don't know. If you're Miles, I think you're playing with, you got to feel like you're almost playing with the house's money here, right?
Yeah.
Like you're in this game. You have an opportunity. So look, we're going to go out there. We're going to throw everything at them, right? We're going to get creative on offense. We're going to execute, but we're going to get creative. Maybe take some risks on defense. Maybe bring some pressures. Get Sammy Edwards off his rhythm, and don't be surprised for a fake punt or an onside kick here. Again, because if you're Miles, I think you're playing with the house's money, Chris.
Yeah, I mean, it's not a tough. It's a very tough environment to go into. Valdosta in general. Yeah. And I think you're gonna have to. I mean, it's the playoffs. You got to take some risk at some point, because running the ball ain't gonna be enough. And what are you gonna do? Yeah,
agreed. You have to find a way to throw the football and come up with some big plays. So yeah, I think again, two very, very intriguing matchups here, Chris, in Super Region 2 this week. I think what we got spoiled, in my opinion, this past weekend, Chris, and I'm not just talking about Division or Super Region 2 rather, but I'm talking about all of Division 2. I think there were some really, really exciting playoff games that we've all had the opportunity to kind of go back and watch now, and there's some really exciting football games. We got spoiled. I hope that this week we have some really, really good football games, particularly here in Super Region 2. I think we've got some really unique matchups, some exciting matchups. And if you'd asked me 2 weeks ago that this was round 2, this is what we were looking at, it wasn't on my bingo card. I don't know about you, but it wasn't on my bingo card.
Well, the Miles was like we did pick Miles to win.
Right, yeah.
But the other side of the bracket was not really on anybody's bingo card, I don't think, and except for the fans of those teams, and now it's a really interesting, it's a very engaging round 2 in Super Region 2.
It is, and I think there's another piece to this we haven't really talked about, Chris. I just want to make a mention of. If you play football, if you've ever coached football, this is a very special week of the year. If you are playing football on Thanksgiving, like that is a box that you talk about. It's kind of your goal to be playing football at any level Thanksgiving week. You want to go to football on Thanksgiving. That's kind of what you want to do. That being said, I think because it brings a team together, it brings you together. Sometimes I don't think going on the road in this environment is necessarily a bad thing either, because this is typically the worst week of attendance that we see in the playoffs, because it's Thanksgiving week. Kids aren't on campus. A lot of campuses are closed. Everybody's home with their families. So this is a tough environment to play in a lot of situations, I think, this week being Thanksgiving week.
Yeah, but it doesn't hurt to be this far south. I tell you that much.
No, not at all. Not at all. Not at all, Chris. But, well, Chris, any departing thoughts here going into week 2 of the playoffs?
Well, the 4 teams that we have are some really great options in terms of who to root for. You've got 3 conference champions, and the 4th that's just as capable of winning a conference championship. So it's going to be a great Saturday. I'm really looking forward to it. We didn't get to see Valdosta, so it's going to be really interesting to see how Valdosta enters the chat for the playoffs. And so it's going to be a really good one. I'm really looking forward to it. I just hope the streams, our live streams, are a lot better.
Yeah, likewise. I'm excited to sit and watch a little football, and I'm really looking forward to some really exciting Super Region 2 matchups, and really D2 matchups for that matter. So, as always, thank you for tuning in to the Week 2 preview pod here for D2Football.com. You can see me and Kferg next week as we preview the regional final as the playoffs march on here in 2024. Thank you very much, and enjoy your football Saturday this week.